Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another interview for the VeChain Foundation Research. Today, we have Daniel with us. Daniel, can you introduce yourself and let everybody know what you do?
Yeah. So my name's Daniel. I'm the head of research at the Coin Bureau. We're the largest YouTube channel about cryptocurrency. You can think of me as kind of being the back end to Guy's front end for simplicity's sake. And that's it.
All right, I like it, short and sweet. So we briefly talked about this interview, talked about the work we're doing with VeChain to understand among industry leaders as to the desirability and feasibility of tracking carbon credits, carbon offsets, carbon emissions on the blockchain, as well as this whole emerging topic of refi. So can you begin to give your thoughts on any one of those topics or all of those topics?
Yeah. Yeah, sounds good. So I don't know. I imagine if the viewers are if they know VeChain, the chances are they know the Coin Bureau. But we did a video about carbon credits. I think it was a couple months back, and I did the research for that one. So I do actually have quite a bit to say there. I guess I'll start by saying that my biggest concern about the carbon credits in general is basically, well, one is that there are no kind of like global standards. I think that's something that's been raised many times as well. There isn't kind of like a global standard for what counts. I don't know, like how many trees need to be planted for it to count as one kilogram of CO2 or what have you, that's been removed from the atmosphere. So one is the absence of standards. The second issue is kind of basically that a lot of these carbon credits, I'm not going to use any explicit language here, but let's just say that they're just scams. Basically, you're selling it, like, again, because there are no standards, because there seems to be lacking regulation. That you basically have people that are saying of course, like here you can I don't know, here's a carbon credit that I'm just going to sell to you because of this piece of land that I have, and I'm gonna keep it nice and safe, but they were never planning on building on it anyway. And they basically have all this money coming in, and it's and there was that article that I had sent you, Justin, from The Guardian recently, something like 97% of carbon credits issued by like the largest carbon credit issuer, basically they actually don't reduce carbon. There's been lots of concerns that even the whole scheme of carbon credits basically like incentivizes, because it's like you don't actually reduce any emissions. You just ask people to pay for it. And if that money is not used wisely, then in the end, all you're doing is you're just creating basically another speculative market, which, to be honest, this is kind of what I think a lot of these refi projects are kind of doing, is they're trying to tap into the speculative aspect of the carbon credits market, where it's, if you think about it, at least, again, and I'm happy to be corrected on this if either you, Justin, know, or someone feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter or what have you. But my understanding of carbon credit markets is that obviously the goal is to reduce carbon. So that means that every single year, the amount of carbon credits that can be issued is reduced. And if you just simple supply and demand dynamics tells you that the price of this carbon credits are going to go up over time. So this is therein lies the speculative aspect. You're basically it's literally like investing in like another kind of like Bitcoin. But the problem is that this Bitcoin that we're talking about is not transparent. At least, again, I'm not talking about the blockchain part. I'm talking about the actual issuance of carbon credits. The actual issuance of carbon credits is not transparent. You can't really verify anything that's going on. And the bigger issue is that if you do end up in a scenario, and this is this touches on a bigger issue, if you do end up having global standards, and I think the United Nations is working on like a global carbon credit system or something like this. But if you end up with a centralized authority that takes control of the whole carbon credits, then what you're investing in when you're buying, like either whether I don't want to name any names, but from any of these real-fi projects, when you buy these tokenized carbon credits, you're basically buying kind of like a stable coin that has properties that are similar to Bitcoin, if that makes any sense, where the issuing authority behind those carbon credits could at any time, they could say that one of these refi projects, for whatever reason, we don't like what they're doing, so we're no longer going to issue carbon credits to them, and all of a sudden the value of those tokens goes to nothing. And this is an issue where when you get a headline saying that 97% of the carbon credits from this particular issuer were faulty and don't reduce carbon, then what does that do to the price of the tokenized version of that asset? right? Like, would you see it's the equivalent of if someone said, hey, the reserves for, one of the largest stable coins has been seized or is not. I imagine someone came and said 97% of the reserves for Tether, which some would say is the case, but I don't think it is. But let's just say, for sake of argument, if 97% of the reserves for Tether were actually worthless, then what would happen to the price of USDT? Obviously, it would go down, and that's obviously a financial risk. It's a huge risk to the protocols that are otherwise doing really good work. So that's kind of like, I guess, a couple thoughts there. The other thing that I'll throw out, and then I'll let you jump in there, Justin, because I can keep going forever. But the other thing that I'll mention is that when it comes to this issuance, I guess, and trading of carbon credits, is that something that specific people actually want to be transparent? Do people actually want to know? Do these institutions actually want to know, or do these institutions want you to be able to see how many carbon credits they hold? Do they want you to see when they're moving carbon credits around? There's a case to be made that the institutions don't want that, and it's my personal belief that as much as privacy has been, the kind of black sheep of the crypto industry, ultimately it's going to be the institutions, the central banks, the governments. When central banks start buying cryptocurrency in 2025, they're going to start calling for some privacy protections, because they don't want you to be able to see how much Bitcoin a certain central bank holds. And I think that you already saw I guess, to go on a little bit of a tangent, but you're already kind of seeing this we already saw this with the Taproot upgrade, which, like Taproot, whatever, it sounds like it's nothing. But in short, what Taproot did for Bitcoin is it made all the transactions appear the same, whether it's a multi-sig, whether it's going and joining a Lightning network, whether it's a atomic swap. And all of a sudden you've created, actually, when you have a separate layer, you can now interact with different layers of Bitcoin with some degree of privacy. And I imagine we're going to see something similar with the carbon credits, where they're probably going to end up migrating to some sort of layer 2 that's going to be specifically for refi. And maybe I'm making a big prediction now, but I think that similarly to NFTs, I think the biggest opportunity in refi is going to be actually whatever base layer is powering these tokens. And I do think it's going to be a layer 2 of it could be a layer 1, but I have a feeling it's going to be a layer 2 that's on something like Ethereum, because again, institutions want security more than anything else. And the most secure blockchains, for better or for worse, for the time being, are Bitcoin and Ethereum. So this is kind of, I guess, where, anyway, I could keep going on the tangent, but I hope you have some interesting thoughts there.
No, you actually, yeah, I got about four bullets here, but you bring up an excellent point in terms of privacy, in that, I come from the supply chain industry, right? And whenever I ask, leaders of organizations, about blockchain, that's their primary concern, the privacy. We don't want to release our data. Our data is our competitive advantage and all these things like that. So you make an excellent point. You make an excellent point when you talk about the whole privacy piece. And that's one thing I talk about a lot, in that I think that zero knowledge proofs, once the enterprises come in, I think zero knowledge proofs are going to be massive. I think that zero knowledge proofs I think zero knowledge proofs are going to be the thing, the solution, the tool that kind of gets these organizations into the blockchain space, right? Because now it's going to take someone like you all to kind of create the education so that they understand it, right? But once they get to education, once they get to that point, then they'll understand that zero knowledge proofs may provide, the privacy that they're concerned about, which turns a lot of these organizations away, from blockchain, because they think that yes, it's transparent, right? Now, going back to everything you said, if we include zero knowledge proofs, do you think that blockchain could be a viable solution to kind of alleviate some of your concerns that you spoke about?
Yeah, I think so. But again, my bigger concern, I guess, and I probably should emphasize a little bit more, is I guess I didn't really mention it, but my biggest concern in general with carbon credits is kind of, again, the goal, again, is to reduce carbon, which you could make the argument, whether reducing carbon all the way down to zero is something that you necessarily want to do in an economy. That's a debate that can be had. But not only that, but what I'm really concerned about when it comes to whether it's tokenized or not, what I'm concerned about is the incentive that the whole carbon credit scheme is going to create. Because again, if you right now, at least to my understanding, and again, feel free to correct me or anyone can correct me here, but carbon credits are restricted. I think, and Justin, you had mentioned this, I think, before we started speaking, that carbon credits are really right now more geared towards institutional use. But this is something that is, because I guess at least in Europe, for example, like institutions, basically they have to buy carbon credits to offset, some X amount. And each year the European Union reduces the amount of carbon credits that are available, because of course they're trying to reduce carbon emissions. But so, that's all well and good, but what happens when you start to apply this to, let's say, to people, where you actually do introduce like an individual carbon credit score, which is kind of like the more dystopian element of what we had mentioned in our video, where basically every year the government or whoever would give you X amount of carbon credits that you can spend. And then what happens to people who are, less fortunate, who are, historically, you could say, like marginalized, where they're basically forced to, to not consume any carbon whatsoever, and basically in some cases probably literally almost kill themselves to not use any carbon, so that they can sell it for money, so that they continue to survive. And each year that amount gets smaller and smaller. Meanwhile, the rich folks who have the closest connections to the organizations that are going to be issuing these carbon credits, whether it's the government, whether it's the United Nations, the individual, it'll be literally the same thing that we have today with fiat money, where the people who have the closest connections to the commercial banks and the central banks, they can borrow directly at a rate that no one else can. And then they buy up all the assets, and then they use those assets as collateral to borrow even more. And if they default, then the government bails them out. And we're going to see the exact same thing, in my opinion, if we go down this path. We're going to see the exact same thing happen with carbon credits, where at the beginning, I think it's actually going to be really good. But then over time, you're going to see these really perverse incentives evolve the same way they did in the traditional financial system. And you're basically going to see all these institutions just getting richer and richer because they have the closest connections to the issuance of the issuers of these carbon credits. I personally think that the best thing that blockchain could do, zero knowledge proofs or not, whether it's the biggest thing that refi could do is find some way of, in a decentralized way, issuing decentralized carbon credits that do not require a centralized issuer, so where you can actually have verifiable proof that yes, this carbon was reduced. You could potentially do this, using peer-to-peer networks, something like Helium, where you can set up sensors and you can show proof of, things like, you can really get into some really interesting ideas. But in my personal opinion, there's two ways that refi can go. Either refi can decide that they're basically going to be a stable coin issuer, an issuer of an asset that is going to have the same perverse incentives as a fiat currency, and they'll get rich in the process. But if they roll out central bank digital currencies, then all the money they make will be worthless anyway. But that's a topic for another time. But either they can go that path, or they can decide, what, we're going to do things differently. Instead of integrating with the existing system, we're going to disrupt it. We're going to make some sort of decentralized carbon credit that can be verified by anyone, that anyone can issue, where I can basically prove and be like, look, this month or this week, I traveled less or I consumed less, and you can prove that to the blockchain, and the blockchain will reward you with a carbon credit, and you don't have to go to some centralized issuer, and you won't have the same perverse dynamics come up. That's kind of my thoughts there. But anyway, I hope that made a little bit of sense there.
Oh yeah, it did, and kind of, I'm gonna try a little guy saying, right? So what you're telling me is carbon credits may be a new gold.
Yeah. Well, if they're done correctly, yeah. I mean, 100%. It's like if you can make, and again, it does beg the question of whether reducing carbon, and like how much carbon do you actually want to reduce? Do you actually want to go all the way to zero? Because if you go all the way to zero with no alternative energy source or what have you, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. You're going to end up like Sri Lanka. You're going to end up like, I don't know, South Africa is maybe not a good example right now, but Sri Lanka is definitely a good example there. You don't want to, you have to question the whole basis of the scheme itself, where, if it, and again, sorry to go on the tangent, Justin, but I think it's something that's worth noting, something potentially that, refi could also potentially address. But take a second to consider that the whole reason why we have all these, like the whole purpose of carbon credits is to reduce the damage on lower the damage that humans are doing to the environment, basically. But if you really think about it, the whole reason why we have all this damage to the environment is because of overconsumption. And overconsumption comes from the incentive in inflationary currencies that are losing value. There's an incentive to spend. If you had a currency that actually held its value over time, then you would be incentivized to save rather than spend. You would only spend on the absolute necessities. Consumption would come down naturally, and you wouldn't have to pass a single law. And all this, this natural reduction in consumption, just from this small change in incentives for making a monetary system that can be that's constantly inflationary versus one that is actually deflationary, And of course, the powerful people don't want a deflationary system because deflation makes debt more expensive, and all these governments and corporations have a bunch of debt. But if you actually wanted to solve climate change and all these things that all these refi projects ultimately want to do, then the way you do that is by creating a hard money system, a sound money system where there's deflation that incentivizes people to spend rather than save, that reduces the overconsumption. And you could have a planet with, 5 or 10 times, potentially 10 times more people, and it would be completely fine. Why? Because the average person would only consume what they absolutely need to, which at the end of the day, this is what carbon credits are supposed to do too. They're incentivizing people not to consume less, but you don't have to create this huge centralized crazy scheme. All you have to do is change the money, and that'll fix so many issues, whether it's wealth inequality and all these things. I truly believe, because all that'll happen is all these, again, like my mother is Colombian. Okay. So I my background, there's real poverty in places like Colombia and Latin America. And a lot of it comes from the fact that they, at least in places, let's say for like El Salvador, where they use a foreign currency that's constantly being inflated and they just have no chance. And anyway, I guess it's I apologies for the tangent there, but I feel free to bring us back on track there, Justin.
Keep the tangents, because that's how I get nuggets. Whenever people start talking about things that are passionate about, that's where the nuggets come from, right? So whenever you went on your last run, whenever you went on your last bull run, right? I wrote down. So, we say that it's hard to kind of validate some of these claims that these organizations are saying in terms of carbon credits. And I had a call with Uma yesterday about their optimistic oracle, right? So although they're using their oracle primarily for prediction markets, do you see a place for or a need for oracles within the sustainability space and for
100%? Yeah, 100%. I mean, whether we're talking carbon credits or NFTs or what have you, the name of the game is going to be infrastructure. So you're going to need, like you said, you're going to need an oracle. You're going to need somewhere to store the data, who has what, because, unfortunately, some of these blockchains are becoming very big. I actually recall, and again, VeChain community, feel free to grill me, but I remember last time when we had done an update on the project, what VeChain developers were actually, they had mentioned in an interview that they're concerned that the blockchain is becoming too large too quickly. And this is what happens to every single crypto project that has a fast transaction speed. Because what happens is basically you're creating, like the size of the blockchain just grows, I guess you could say like just very quickly. I was going to say exponentially, but that's not technically correct. But in any case, decentralized data storage. It would be really interesting, I think, again, from refi in this niche, whether it's VeChain or otherwise, to think like, is it possible, like you were saying, to create even potentially like an oracle that is specifically designed for carbon credits? Is it possible to create a decentralized data storage solution that is specifically for the storage of tokenized carbon, or of the storage of transaction history of tokenized carbon credits? Because again, like, and this ties into, Justin, you may or may not be familiar with Cosmos, where the idea behind Cosmos is that every single application is eventually going to need its own blockchain because it's going to have too much adoption. I think that the same thing applies to infrastructure, where, everyone assumes, oh, we're going to use Chainlink, but no, and everyone's going to use Chainlink and there's no room for competition. I'm sorry, but that's BS. What's going to happen is that over time, there's going to be so much data, there's going to be so much demand for infrastructure that you're going to need an UMA with this optimistic oracle. You're going to need probably dozens, probably hundreds of oracles, and you're going to, and rather than just having a chain for each dApp, someday you might actually need a decentralized storage solution and an oracle and all these other node hosting services, stuff like Anchor and these projects which escape me now. But you're like the potential in refi, in my opinion, comes fundamentally from the building of infrastructure. If projects can build infrastructure and focus less so on tokenizing, because anyone, tokenizing the carbon credit, that's the easy part. That's the get rich quick and fast part. If you want something that's gonna last and something that's actually gonna have use, then creating a custom oracle for refi, creating a custom decentralized data storage solution, and what have you. I think that's where the potential is, and I'm not sure if that's something that UMA is seeking to address, but that's something potentially worth looking into as a refi project. Yeah,
I like that one. I love that one. Yeah. So
yeah.
So anything else we covered a lot. We covered a lot. I'm gonna have to come back and transcribe this interview. This was a good one. Do you have anything else you wanted to add in terms of, you know, how we can actually leverage blockchain to assist in this sustainability effort that everybody talks about? Because, you know, when we talk about sustainability, I've been in this space a lot. I created a course for University of Southern California for their new sustainability program. And over the last couple of years, it's just a lot of talk in terms of sustainability, in terms of reducing carbon emissions, becoming carbon negative and things like that. You know, so something I'm very passionate about. And again, I come from an industry, so I know a lot of this stuff is just talk. So I think that maybe I'm just being too optimistic where I'm saying, if you're saying you're going to do it, put it on a blockchain and prove it, right? You know, so that's always kind of been my mantra. So, you know, do you have anything else to add to or any other thoughts to how we can leverage this? And it doesn't have to be blockchain, how we can leverage technology to kind of move more toward this vision that we all look to bring.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you know this, Justin, but Solana, the founder of Solana, I guess creator of Solana, I know there's technically co-founders, whatever. Anatoly Yakovenko is actually also really passionate about addressing environmental issues through blockchain and cryptocurrency. And I think he mentioned in an interview once that, you know, if he wasn't doing Solana, then he would be trying to do something basically in refi. And what's really fascinating to me is that I think that there's potential, again, like the crypto industry, and I guess this relates to another discussion that we had earlier, but the crypto industry, I think, has to think less about trying to integrate with existing, because again, like you were saying, like the existing systems of addressing things like sustainability, it's mostly talk and not much gets done. Why anyone would want to integrate with such a system? And again, of course, the reason why they want to integrate is because they want to make money quickly, because there's all these, you know, government spending programs and whatever that are going towards this sector, so that people can get paid to basically sit around and talk and do nothing. But I mean, I hope that that's not coming off as too aggressive. But if you were to change, I guess, like, again, the crypto industry can't think of like going in and integrating with the existing system. I truly believe that the whole point of crypto is to create alternatives that will actually disrupt and address these issues. So when it comes to something like sustainability, I do think that there is a potential for, you know, for a crypto project, whether it's whether it's refi or what have you. Even something, a great example actually, which you may or may not have heard about, is something like Algorand, where on the Algorand blockchain, the validators actually don't earn any block rewards. Or transaction fees. So what happens to these transaction fees is they basically get sent to like a random wallet address, and they just sit there and they do nothing. And what the Algorand Foundation decided, or I don't know, the Algorand community, you know, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but what they decided to do was to use these transaction fees to actually buy carbon credits to make the Algorand blockchain carbon neutral, which is, you know, a clever way of doing it. But now imagine a scenario where you could take a portion of transaction fees from something like Ethereum, and you could use that to build a solar farm or build a wind farm, or ideally build a nuclear power plant that is actually safe. Because again, you know, everyone is, you know, really paranoid about nuclear, but you have to remember, and Justin, you probably know this, that there was a huge breakthrough in fusion recently, right? Yeah, fusion nuclear. There's a huge breakthrough, and they're saying, oh, it's going to be another 10 years before we see it. Why? You want to know why? Because there's all this regulation, there's all this red tape. There's too many people in rooms discussing how they're going to do it, whatever. If fusion is known to be something that is safe to experiment with, which I don't know if it is, but let's just say for sake of argument that it is, then you could have a cryptocurrency, you could have a DAO, you could have a refi DAO, pool all this money together to create a fusion reactor in the next couple of years instead of in a couple of decades. And you could get started on going to, you know, on reducing carbon emissions immediately. And people forget one thing. Sorry to go on tangent again here, Justin, but one thing that people forget is that it's not just about the money. It's about the time. Imagine if you were able to build a fusion reactor, you know, crowdfund the development of a fusion reactor with a cryptocurrency in 2 or 3 years, and then you have 7 years of that fusion reactor basically creating limitless amounts of energy, versus waiting that extra 7 years and then making it. You know what I mean? The gains that would be had in those 7 years leading up would just be so incredible for all of society. And so crypto has to stop thinking it's like, oh, how do we backpack and get more of this like fiat money from these institutions that, again, like, you know, in my opinion, that money is eventually going to be worth nothing anyway. radical thought. But why not instead focus on, why don't we crowdfund and build something? Why don't we just build like a solar farm, buy some land and build a solar farm, buy some land and build a wind farm, see how it works, and actually have some financial incentives. Why not make it that whoever buys energy from this wind farm, that money goes to the people who have participated in the DAO, who participated in the crowdfunding? Why the hell do we need all these energy companies? Why the hell do we need all these governments to say, of course there needs to be some regulation, don't get me wrong, but why do we need all this complex infrastructure and bureaucracy? Like, why don't you just crowdfund it and build it yourself, and then have the profits come to the DAO, and then you can use that money to build it and keep building and keep building and keep building, and build another fusion reactor and another solar, and start building solar panels in space. Like all this, reach out to Elon. Elon loves Dogecoin. Why don't you make some solar panels, send them up to space? You could crowdfund that. Of course, individually, we're all, each of us, relative to the people who are really wealthy, relative to the central bankers for sure. Individually, we don't have much money, but if we pool together and we push that money in a certain direction, then what we can do it faster and better. And this is something that Anatoly sees and all these other guys see. And I imagine a lot of guys in the refi industry also see this, that if we can work collectively together and on the same page, we can, what the governments are kind of planning now with all these Green New Deals or whatever, we can do it faster and better and more transparently and everything through blockchain. If we just stop focusing on trying to jump on that bandwagon as, I want money from the Green New Deal too. No, make your own Green New Deal. Let's work together. Let's do it together. And let's have it done, in a couple of years or a couple of months instead of like a decade, right? Anyway, I hope that's a good note to end on.
Oh, yes, it is. Yes, it is. All right. So that was the last note, but I have one more question. What do you think? What do you think are the future of DAOs? Because you brought it up and you brought up a good point. And you brought up a good point in a good use case for DAOs. In my opinion, I don't think that a DAO like that may gain traction because we're dealing with people here, right? We're still dealing with people.
Yeah,
I don't think people will see there's enough money in it. So use case you mentioned may not have legs, and that's a perfect use case for a DAO. So in your opinion, how far out do you think that we are away from? And we're talking about this in the bear market, right? In the bull market, they're saying, DAOs are the future. But now that we've seen what happened with these DAOs, what are your thoughts on DAOs and the future of DAOs?
In short, I think it's going to sound pretty horrible, but I think that unless we find a new governance structure, then all DAOs are going to fail. I know that's a bold prediction to make, but I want you to imagine, because right now the way that DAOs are set up is that they're set up in kind of like a democratic process, and the democracy is that one token equals one vote, which is not a very good democracy because, of course, the wealthiest, I don't know if you saw this headline, I think it's something like 97% or something like 3% of the token holders have like 97% of the voting power, some obscene or 87%, some obscene imbalance in voting power. But even if you were to do a system, which of course they're trying to develop now, is to, you have like a decentralized digital ID where it's like one person equals one vote, and you have a, direct democracy the same way you do, in some countries, then you run into the same issue, because where are all the decisions in the the United States is a different situation because you have states and all this stuff. But for sake of argument, it's like all the power in the United Kingdom is concentrated in London. Most of the power in the United States is concentrated in Washington. So if you create DAOs with democratic systems or totalitarian systems or a dictatorship, you're eventually going to end up with the same centralization and issues that we see today. So we not only have to decentralize. So DAOs not only need to decentralize, the participation, they need to decentralize the structure itself. Otherwise, you're just going to the process of DAO voting is inherently centralizing, and that is going to lead to failure over time, because you're going to end up with a group of people that have a lot of influence. And you saw this recently with the venture capitalists fighting back and forth. And so what I personally think needs to happen is we need to have a new governance structure. And I actually came up with one, and I'll save that, I guess, for another discussion. But I came up with a governance structure that is neither democratic nor dictatorial, because those are kind of like the two extremes. But there is a middle ground that you can have, where you can have a new governance structure. And if DAOs can implement something along those lines, then the whole purpose of an organization, if the organization has bad governance, then the organization is doomed to fail. The way that DAOs are structured today, they are all doomed to fail. They're all doomed to fail. And I'm going to say that with 100% boldness. So there needs to be a change on that front. Anyway, that's
That was excellent. That was a great way to end this conversation. So Daniel, thank you once again. Thank you once again for all this. Can you let everybody know where they can find you?
Yeah. Just find me on LinkedIn, Daniel Krupka. You can also follow me on Twitter, but there's some spicy stuff on there, so don't get offended. I mean, feel free to reach out and what have you. And I'm a busy guy, but if you manage to get a hold of me, then consider yourself lucky.
Oh, and I can attest to that one. I can attest to that one myself. All right. So, once again, thank you for taking the time, and everyone else, until next time. Thanks.
Yeah.